3 police vehicles were parked along the rough gravel path that led to my vineyard. Their flashing red and blue lights threw strange, dancing shadows over the orderly lines of grapevines. I brushed the soil off my hands with a worn cloth and strolled toward the officers, entirely unfazed by the dramatic scene playing out on my land. Beyond the patrol cars, I spotted her standing with her arms folded tightly across her chest, wearing that same absurd navy blazer she always donned for HOA gatherings. Her expression had twisted into a glare fierce enough to curdle milk. I greeted the approaching officers with a broad smile and declared with absolute assurance, "Officers, you're wasting your efforts here." Karen's gaze sharpened as she observed from afar, no doubt puzzled as to why I remained so calm instead of panicking, as she had clearly anticipated. Allow me to go back a few weeks to clarify how this absurd scenario came about. My name is Jack, and following 3 decades of military service, I chose to retire to this serene suburban edge to fulfill my longtime passion for cultivating grapes and producing wine. I acquired a stunning parcel of land that spanned gentle rolling hills, ideal for viticulture, and devoted months to studying the most suitable grape varieties for the local climate. The estate was tranquil, secluded, and crucially, situated just beyond the limits of the Sunset Ridge HOA, allowing me to live free from constant scrutiny over trivial matters like mailbox colors or lawn height. The HOA was managed by a woman named Karen Middleton, who had crowned herself the community's unofficial protector of real estate values and ethical norms. She was the sort who relished exercising control over neighbors, regardless of how minor or insignificant that authority might be. Karen had served as HOA president for 7 consecutive years, governing the area with a firm hand concealed behind insincere grins and subtly hostile emails. She was exactly the kind of individual who would measure your shrubs with a tape measure and issue a citation if they exceeded the limit by even half an inch. For the initial few months, everything remained calm as I focused on preparing the soil and planting my first rows of vines. I rose early each day, cared for my grapes, and savored the deep fulfillment of creating something through my own labor. However, tranquility rarely endures when someone like Karen lives nearby. It didn't take long for her to begin asserting herself. The initial warning arrived as a certified letter bearing the prominent HOA emblem on the envelope. The message asserted that my property had become an unsightly blight, and that my untidy terrain was diminishing neighborhood property values. Karen had evidently driven past my vineyard, and concluded that the view of newly turned earth and young grapevines offended her refined tastes. She insisted that I halt all farming activities and return the land to its original condition within 30 days or face additional consequences. I reviewed the letter twice, laughed quietly, and deposited it straight into the waste bin, where it deserved to be. When Karen failed to get the submissive reply she craved, the correspondence began arriving more often. Each subsequent one grew increasingly insistent, complete with warnings of penalties, lawsuits, and neighborhood penalties. She alleged that I was breaching community guidelines, zoning laws, and what she termed aesthetic harmony obligations. I disregarded vehemently because I possessed knowledge that Karen evidently lacked. My property fell outside the HOA's authority, and she held no power whatsoever over my use of my own land. Yet Karen was not the sort to concede defeat elegantly. When her bullying methods proved ineffective, she chose to intensify the conflict. She began contacting the County Code Enforcement Department, submitting reports about supposed unauthorized buildings and accusations that I was operating an unlawful enterprise. On each occasion, inspectors arrived, examined my fully compliant vineyard setup, and departed without citing any infractions. This only heightened Karen's rage, and I could observe her mounting irritation with every unsuccessful effort to close me down. The turning point occurred on a Tuesday morning while I was inspecting my vines for any indications of illness. I spotted a dark sedan stationed at the border of my property, with Karen seated at the wheel, speaking excitedly into her phone. She waved her free hand dramatically, and it was clear she was building toward one of her infamous outbursts. I returned to my tasks, but I sensed that whatever scheme she was hatching would backfire on her. As expected, within an hour, I heard the noise of several vehicles heading toward my land. I glanced up to see 3 police cruisers entering my driveway, lights flashing and motors idling. Karen's sedan trailed right behind, and I observed her leaping from the vehicle almost before it fully stopped. She strode toward the officers with her characteristic arrogant gait, clipboard clutched firmly, prepared to orchestrate the whole affair. The lead officer, a tall figure with gray-streaked hair and weary eyes, came toward me wearing a mildly regretful look. He presented himself as Sergeant Martinez and stated that they had been called out due to a report of potential zoning breaches and community rule violations on my property. Karen positioned herself behind him, nodding emphatically and periodically chiming in with remarks about declining property values and neighborhood standards. It was obvious she believed she had at last discovered the means to terminate my vineyard activities. I smiled serenely at Sergeant Martinez and replied, "I appreciate your response, but I believe there's been a mix-up." I stepped over to my truck and pulled out a folder I stored in the glove box precisely for occasions like this. Contained within were duplicates of my property deed, the initial survey plats, boundary records, and a statement from my lawyer verifying that my land lay beyond HOA control. I passed the folder to the sergeant and noted his demeanor shift from professional worry to thinly veiled irritation. Sergeant Martinez examined the papers thoroughly, cross-referencing the survey maps with the property lines and verifying the legal details against the deed. After a few minutes, he raised his eyes to me and declared, "Sir, it seems your property is indeed outside the HOA boundaries." Sergeant Martinez then turned toward Karen, who remained positioned there, clutching her clipboard, eagerly anticipating the moment he would begin handing out citations. The expression on her face as she grasped that her elaborate scheme was unraveling was utterly priceless. Karen's tone escalated to a piercing shriek as she began disputing with the officers, maintaining that an error must have occurred and that I was obviously breaching neighborhood guidelines. She produced her own binder of materials, containing printed correspondence, photos of my land, and a personally compiled catalog of what she deemed infractions. Sergeant Martinez heard her out courteously while she rambled on about declining real estate values and communal norms, though I noticed his tolerance diminishing by the minute. At last, Sergeant Martinez raised his hand and stated decisively, "Ma'am, this man's property falls outside HOA oversight. You possess no control over his land usage, and submitting unfounded reports to law enforcement is a grave issue." The blood drained from Karen's cheeks as the complete ramifications of her conduct started to register. She had just squandered the efforts and assets of 3 police officers on a baseless personal grudge. Once the police departed, I resolved it was my turn to respond. I contacted my lawyer, a keen professional named Rebecca Chen, who focused on real estate law and had previously handled excessive HOA committees. I detailed the events to her, supplied duplicates of every menacing letter Karen had dispatched, and requested she lodge an official grievance for stalking and improper utilization of public assets. Rebecca was eager to handle the matter, particularly after I demonstrated the escalating pattern of hostile actions from Karen. In less than a week, Rebecca had prepared a thorough cease and desist notice that detailed Karen's intimidation efforts exhaustively. The notice referenced particular statutes concerning ownership entitlements, the abuse of public facilities, and warnings of litigation should the interference persist. She forwarded duplicates to Karen individually, the HOA directors, and the county prosecutor's department. The notice emphasized unequivocally that any additional meddling with my land would trigger a substantial legal claim. The reaction was swift and striking. Less than a day after getting the notice, Karen phoned me personally, her tone trembling with poorly suppressed fury. She charged me with stirring unrest, asserted I aimed to ruin the area, and vowed to render my existence unbearable. I replied steadily that I was documenting the call, and that her threats were merely bolstering my lawsuit against her. The connection cut off instantly. News circulated rapidly throughout the community regarding the lawsuit targeting Karen and the HOA. Residents who had endured her despotic control and silence for years abruptly gained the bravery to voice their personal encounters with her, bullying, and misuse of authority. Accounts surfaced of Karen gauging grass lengths with measuring tools, clocking how long trash bins remained at the curb, and dispatching penalties for entirely fabricated breaches. The HOA directors, confronted with rising attorney costs and an intensifying uprising from members, convened an urgent session to address the crisis. Karen attempted to retain dominance, arguing she was safeguarding the area from external dangers and portraying me as the antagonist. However, the remaining directors had reviewed the official papers and recognized that Karen had grossly exceeded her powers. The session evolved into a complete uprising against Karen's command. Property owners who had been cowed into quietude for years rose individually to recount their tales of intimidation, exorbitant penalties, and power exploitation. One senior gentleman described receiving a fine because his newspaper arrived 15 minutes prematurely. A young parent recounted facing lawsuit threats since her kid's chalk art on the pavement contravened some vague visual standard that Karen had fabricated. As the grievances accumulated, it grew evident that Karen's regime of intimidation was at last collapsing. The directors voted without dissent to oust her from the presidency, and multiple participants demanded a full probe into her management of HOA finances and assets. Karen remained in shocked quiet as her meticulously built domain of trivial dominance fell apart around her. Yet the repercussions extended further. My lawyer had diligently assembled evidence that surpassed mere intimidation. She had recorded Karen's habit of submitting bogus complaints to official bodies, squandering public funds, and leveraging her role for individual grudges. The county prosecutor's department regarded the issue gravely and opted to file accusations against Karen for improper use of urgent response systems and submitting fraudulent law enforcement notifications. The HOA additionally encountered major monetary penalties due to Karen's conduct. They had to cover my attorney expenses, release an official community regret, and establish fresh monitoring protocols to avert upcoming power abuses. The overall expense to the group approached $15,000 funds drawn straight from homeowners' funds via raised dues and extra levies. In the meantime, chose to transform the entire ordeal into a beneficial outcome. I arranged a public viewing at my vineyard, welcoming every local resident to visit and discover what Karen had been so obsessed with closing. The turnout proved remarkable, with scores of attendees arriving to explore the grounds and sample my initial wine production. Numerous individuals expressed regret for not challenging Karen earlier and voiced their support for my endeavor. The situational irony amused me as I observed previous HOA supporters enjoying wine crafted from the exact vines Karen had labored intensely to eradicate. They complimented the wine's excellence, inquired about cultivation methods, and quite a few even reserved full cases for future delivery once my subsequent harvest matured. The vineyard Karen had labeled a visual blight was evolving into the community's preferred social spot. The prosecution against Karen progressed rapidly after the county prosecutor's involvement. She faced 3 charges of lodging fake police notifications and 1 of abusing emergency response. The district attorney stressed that these accusations were treated with severity since they diverted critical assets from genuine crises. Karen's lawyer sought to bargain for a settlement, but the prosecutor insisted on setting a precedent with her actions. Ultimately, Karen received a sentence of 6 months in local detention, 3 years of supervised release, and a mandate to compensate $12,000 in damages to offset the expenses of the police deployments sparked by her deceptive alerts. As the judge announced the verdict, Karen's complexion turned ashen, and she clutched the defense bench so tightly her knuckles blanched. At last, comprehending that her insignificant control tactics carried profound actual consequences,